What's up, guys? Jared here to review one of my most anticipated movies of 2022, the wonderfully titled The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, in which Nicolas Cage the man plays Nicolas Cage the meme. My love affair with all things Nicolas Cage hit a fever pitch when I discovered the criminally understudied and underrated 80s vampire flick Vampire's Kiss, which isn't quite a movie that's so bad that it's good. It's more that it's so bad that it's good that it's actually just plain old good. So when I heard that there was a movie coming out that pays tribute to the unique fandom that Nicolas Cage has accrued by going insane on screen for all these years, I was beyond stoked. So without further ado, I'm going to divide this review into 3 parts. The first part is going to be a spoiler-free review. The second part will go into spoiler territory. And then in the third part, I will talk about what I think this film represents for the state of cinema as a whole. So let's get started. As you have likely heard from other review headlines, this film is an absolute delight. It is a total joy from beginning to end. If you're a fan of Nick Cage movies, or even just the delightful excess of his memified performances, you're likely going to enjoy yourself in this movie. It's a tightly structured comedy thriller hybrid that never gets boring, and honestly, it just kind of breezes by in under 2 hours. But most importantly, it is legitimately funny, and the comedy is properly inspired by all the essential tenets of the cult of Cage. The Nicolas Cage character is essentially an embodiment of his unique and now legendary approach to acting. The over-the-top performances that we all know and love from him are contextualized here as the output of a man who is animated by his ecstatic passions for movies, performance, and film history. We see a vision of Nick Cage who loves movies so much that he's bursting from the seams, and it's these explosions of love for all things movies that result in his timeless freakouts. And this very much matches what we know about Cage in real life. He's a guy who loves to work, he has boundless enthusiasm for the craft, and he isn't afraid to resurrect historical versions of what constituted good acting and inject it into a more contemporary era that has largely moved beyond these things. And it's really nice to see this version of Nick Cage and to have it be displayed to a wider audience of people who may think that all the crazy memes are evidence of a drug problem and not just passion for the history of acting. But again, it's not quite the real Nick Cage that we're seeing. It's a character version based on his real life, and the Cage character strikes a wonderful balance between being self-effacing and also being quite endearing. The movie doesn't shy away from the very high highs and the very low lows that his career has experienced over the decades, and seeing a movie star confront accusations of being washed up and losing their talents, it feels really fresh, especially in a time when celebrities can't withstand bruises to their ego without either slapping somebody or getting into Twitter shouting matches with 14-year-olds. There are a couple times in the movie where Cage even makes fun of how pretentious he is about labeling his obscure acting methods. It's just nice to see that kind of self-awareness and self-deprecation from a legacy movie star. But the Nick Cage of this movie is ultimately a memorable character because he's not motivated by the artifice of being a Hollywood movie star or by making the savvy career choices or even by the awards that he's won. He's just driven by his love for the job. He's just a guy who loves acting and loves to act. And that's one of the beautiful things about this movie. It implicitly proves Cage's ability as a top-tier performer just by virtue of the great performance in this movie, while also contextualizing some of the crappier roles that have led to the still widely held opinion that he's a bad actor, and it contextualizes it all as the earnest efforts of a man who loves to act, loves to work, has to pay his bills, and puts 100% of his passion into each and every endeavor. It creates an image of Nicolas Cage that is not only a memorable and likable movie protagonist, but as an embodiment of a very admirable career and a passionate professional, which no matter what your trade is, it's something that we can all appreciate and admire. So also Pedro Pascal plays the billionaire cinephile slash aspiring screenwriter, and he's great at it. He really is quite exceptional. And the bromance between Nick Cage and Pedro is one of the best in recent memory. If you're a film lover, and if you're on this channel, I think there's a good chance that you are, and if you've ever bonded with someone over your shared love for some obscure but daring movies, I think you're really going to connect with the relationship between the two main characters in this movie. Now, there is a plot to the movie. It's a kidnapping plot, and although it does succeed in moving the story forward like it should, it's also the least remarkable thing about the film, and likely the first thing that you're going to forget after leaving the theater. The real draw here is Cage, and if you love yourself some Cage, you're going to love yourself this movie. This is also a movie about making movies, and if you've ever undergone the challenge of trying to craft a story or make a movie, a lot of the scenes between the character Javi, which is Pedro Pascal, and Nick, trying to balance their desire to make something profound and important and beautiful with the necessity of making something that won't come off as pretentious and that somebody will actually watch. Those are some of the best scenes, especially if you've ever tried to waterboard self-hatred, which is what I call creative work, and I think it'll definitely make you laugh. Now, there were a couple of things that I wasn't crazy about. For one, I could have used a bit more Nick Cage freakouts. Now, don't get me wrong, there were a few, but I was expecting some Vampire's Kiss level meme moments, and that didn't really happen. While I respect that the film didn't go full on wish fulfillment and have nothing but Nick Cage getting wide-eyed and loud the whole time, I wouldn't have minded a couple more memeable moments. Also, this film gets pretty meta, which in general I tend to be critical of, but I think it's actually particularly harmful to this movie. See, the thing about getting meta is that it draws attention to the fact that you're watching a movie, which can shatter the suspension of disbelief. And this is a movie about two characters who are professing their love for cinema and the importance of preserving the integrity of storytelling, of myth-making, and how ephemeral and fragile a movie-going experience can be. There's a point in the movie where somebody asks Nicolas Cage what his favorite movie is, and he says this is a question that's impossible to answer because the answer changes so rapidly. It can change based on what the weather is like. It can change based on what stage of life you're in. It can change based on what you had for lunch that day, depending on how that affects the viewing experience. Now, this is a sentiment that I share with Nicolas Cage, that sometimes it makes more sense to rank a movie viewing experience more than it does to rank actual movies. But oftentimes when a movie gets meta, it can compromise that blissful feeling of getting so completely mesmerized and possessed by a story that you have no awareness of anything outside the frame. So it's kind of a bummer that the movie compromises its ability to provide the very thing that it's celebrating. My last complaint about the movie is that some of the thriller elements don't work as well as they should, and I can't really specify why without getting into spoiler territory, which I'm going to do now. So if you haven't seen the movie, or generally you're just trying to avoid spoilers, you've been warned. But honestly, this movie is about hanging out with the Cage Man, and it really can't be spoiled, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. Alright, so the conflict through the bulk of the first two acts is that Cage suspects that Javi is a malicious arms dealer whose evil intentions may reveal themselves at any time and that he'll be in danger. Now, the problem with this is that the tension never really works. Javi being evil, or Cage being in any mortal danger at the hands of Javi, is never believable because so much of the heart of the movie lies in convincing the audience that Javi and Cage comprise a kind of oasis of passionate film lovers surrounded by a world that no longer appreciates it as much as they do. Very early on in the movie, Javi convinces Cage not to retire from acting, and it touches Nicolas Cage on a very spiritual level. So if Javi were to be evil, it would undermine the very productive and heartfelt development for Nicolas Cage, and it's unthinkable for a movie that celebrates the passion that has made Cage's career unique to demonize the character that reinvigorates and reinforces that sacred tenet of Cagedom. So every time the film poses a scenario with a moment of tension where we're meant to believe that Javi could turn into a cold-blooded monster in an instant, it never really works. So to go a little bit further on the criticism of the meta element, so let me give you some background. Basically, Javi and Nick Cage decide to team up to write a script, and that script ends up being inspired by the events that they're currently living through, and that script ends up being a movie called The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, and then at the end of the movie, Cage sits in a movie theater watching a scene that is identical to the one that we experienced, but just with different actors. So You get it. Now, prior to this, throughout the movie, Javi and Nick are brainstorming what they want their movie to be about and what are the ingredients to making a successful movie. Now, these parts succeed in part because the philosophy of what makes a successful movie that they're talking about, they're 100% correct. But I think that there's a hidden cost to this, because in a few scenes they talk about the strategies they need to, in a sense, reluctantly employ in order to make the movie watchable, even though it's not relevant to what they ultimately want to achieve with the film. And then when you see these elements implemented in the film that you, the audience, are watching, it can lessen the intended impact. So to break this down a bit more, basically these two film lovers want to make a profound artistic film for adults, but because they know an audience's attention span is not charity, they argue about it and then reluctantly agree that they're going to add a kidnapping plot to the script just because people need some kind of plot to move things forward, even though the plot, as they admit, is kind of a MacGuffin. So quickly, a MacGuffin is a Hitchcock-era term for a plot device that's basically just a distraction. It's something for the character to chase, a mystery for the audience to ponder, but it's something that ultimately amounts to nothing. So famously, the briefcase full of money from Hitchcock's Psycho, or the briefcase full of something from Pulp Fiction. It's just something that gets the character into the hotel in Psycho where the murdering that makes up the focal point of the movie can take place. Basically, it's just something that keeps people in their seats. But the problem is, the MacGuffin doesn't work if you tell the audience that it's a MacGuffin. It's one of those placebo truths, like some might argue faith in God is. Basically, once you stop believing in it, it stops producing the intended benefit. It only works if the audience thinks that it's important. So in The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, when you hear who are essentially stand-ins for the screenwriters of the movie that you're watching tell you that the main conflict is just a reluctantly implemented distractor that ultimately allows for a movie about Nick Cage confronting his memehood and tumultuous career to be watchable, it kind of loses its power. It's kind of the same thing with the subplot with Nick Cage trying to reconnect with his family. It kind of loses its power when it's framed as just a necessary accessory to the Nick Cage making fun of himself movie to ensure that it has enough heart. And again, for a movie that's so authentic in its celebration of the power of movies, it's kind of disappointing that in paying tribute to the challenges of making a good film, it perhaps inadvertently diminishes the power of itself as a movie. Now, a high point of the movie that I just have to bring up is whenever the character Nicky shows up, he's like the tormenting alter ego that Cage imagines, and he's like essentially an amalgamation of younger movie star era Nick Cage in roles like Moonstruck and Valley Girl. It's from this character that we get the best Nick Cage facial expressions and freak out moments. And I also just want to mention that the film that Cage insists his daughter appreciate is The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which is a silent German expressionist film, and choosing this was a really keen choice because the very performative, over-the-top, expressive acting of the German expressionist films is exactly the kind of acting that Cage sought to bring to modern performances that resulted in some of the most viewed YouTube freakout compilations. So lastly, I want to talk about what this movie says about the state of movies, the state of cinema, and the state of the movie industry. If I were to pair this film with another one that's in the same spiritual vein, I would probably choose Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Like Tarantino's latest film, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent paints cinema and the glamour of Hollywood as somewhat of a relic, as something that the cool kids are not really celebrating anymore. Being schooled in cinema history isn't cool like it used to be. Not even Hollywood is populated with cinephiles anymore. True love for film is something that's seemingly more relegated to the holdouts, the true nerds, the Nicolas Cages, the Javis, the people who experienced more than just the world's favorite pastime for 100 or so years. They experienced an enduring and potent form of myth-making. So if you compare this film to other movies about Hollywood, like let's say Get Shorty or The Player, there's a sense of glamour in these films that incentivizes characters to get into the industry. So John Travolta's gangster character in Get Shorty is enchanted with the prestige and romance of being in the pictures, and his slick, wise guy badassery pairs well with the hustle of Hollywood. And then Tim Robbins in The Player, Well, he's basically a player. I mean, he drives around in a drop-top car convertible, he's making power plays, and he's reveling in his position as somebody who can mold popular culture. But the Hollywood that we see in The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent is void of that enchanting charm. The younger generation is unconvinced of the power of cinema. Nick Cage, a movie star, is behind on his rent. His agent doesn't have nearly the swagger of someone like Kevin Spacey's character in the 1994 movie Swimming with Sharks. Hollywood used to be a place where people went who wanted glamour and money, but increasingly it's a place where it's less of a financial opportunity. If you want to get rich, you go into gaming or tech. But movies are just more and more for the true believers, the true warriors of cinema. The luster has kind of dulled, and the golden days seem to be behind us. It is, in a sense, another installment in the era of post-cinema films, but I think that the movie does end on a hopeful note for the future of movies. The movie ends with Cage's daughter asking Nick to watch Paddington 2, which was also one of Javi's favorite movies. And this movie about a fluffy bear kind of functions as a symbol of hope for cinema's future relevance to people who aren't huge film nerds. And it's fitting that it's a movie that doesn't have an ounce of irony or self-awareness. It's just pure, honest, well-executed earnestness. And it's a nice reminder that yeah, we may get caught up in and dazzled by a novel perspective or new ways to feel elevated by lampooning what is basically the simple trick of storytelling. But despite all that, a well-told narrative, an earnest and authentic story will always capture our imagination and resonate with our universal humanity. So, long live cinema, and long live Nicolas Cage. And speaking of platforms that challenge the supremacy of cinema, I've created myself a presence on Twitch, and I've been loving it. So catch me playing Elden Ring by clicking the link in the description and join the budding community that's just getting started. I'm streaming Mondays, Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays at 9 a.m. Pacific time. I've got special guests like Mark Schroeder from Earthling Cinema and a philosophy teacher named Mateusz Rozarin. They're always joining me on the stream. We're always talking about philosophy or gaming or culture, current events. So join me, hop on, and let's chat. So don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more content. I've got some new exciting stuff coming down the pipeline that you won't want to miss out on. So, you know, do the whole ringing bell thing or whatever. And as always, thanks so much for watching, guys. Peace.